what I want to do today is I want to kind of grab three of the things I've seen you guys writing about and talking about, and I want to just address them because they're interesting to me and they're interesting to our community. I know some of our folks on Facebook and on Twitter have been talking about these topics. And so I want to go through, here's the three things I want to ask you about. I want to ask you about Dolby Atmos because something came out just at the start of this year where we thought we were going to get paid a bit more money if we uploaded spatial audio tracks to Apple Music, and that turned out to possibly not be true, and maybe even the opposite. Some changes at Spotify, because everybody was talking about at the end of last year, these new sub 1,000 stream. And then, of course, we want to get a little update from 3Tone, because a lot of people in our community are very keen on what's been happening, the absolute dumpster fire that's going on over there. So we want to chat about that. Let's start with Dolby Atmos real quick, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Dolby Atmos is kind of this modern surround sound technology that employs not just the horizontal that we're kind of used to, but the vertical space as well. And then from what I understand, spatial audio, which I believe is just Apple's fancy name for Dolby Atmos, is what they've been sort of emulating through AirPods and I think in the new VR headsets as well. This kind of, you're supposed to be experiencing surround sound in your ears through just your AirPods or your AirPod Maxes. The idea, from what I understood, and I thought it was quite interesting the first time I heard a Dolby Atmos or a spatial audio song on Apple Music, there was this idea that in order to push this platform more, to hopefully sell more AirPods, that Apple would maybe compensate artists and labels at a higher royalty rate if they were to upload these tracks, because these mixes are very expensive to have made. If you're mixing in Pro Tools is starting to add the technology, but it's right now it's difficult because to mix you have to have one of these Dolby Atmos rooms. So anyway, we now find out that this may not be the case, that there were rumors back in the fall that they were sending letters to labels saying that there might be a new royalty tier for people who upload spatial audio. So let us know what's happened with that.
Yeah, so I mean, your introduction to Dolby Atmos and spatial audio there was probably the closest to accurate that I've heard anybody in the music business who doesn't work for Dolby give. But there are still a couple of things that I'll just very briefly tackle. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Dolby Atmos is this new modern standard. There is a distinct difference between Dolby Atmos and Apple Spatial, which is Apple Spatial is a sort of further implementation of Dolby Atmos, and it specifically relates, as you kind of said, it specifically relates to, I've got mine in just now, AirPod Pro, great kit. I love them. I've got two pairs because I spend so much time on Zoom. I swap them out when they run out of battery.
Yeah.
Apple Spatial means that if you're listening to a Dolby Atmos mix, not only do you get the Atmos immersive effect, but actually as you move your head, your head is moving in a stationary soundscape. So if you do if the music is coming from here and you move your head, you're going to hear it as though you're moving your head in a room where the music's coming from here. The other really important thing to understand about Dolby Atmos is that actually it's a great standard. It's a brilliant standard because it is, I've talked to a lot of Atmos engineers, I've talked to Dolby themselves about this, and it's basically a really elegant audio format. And the reason it's elegant is because if you have an amazing home cinema or something like that, or room for listening to music in with an incredible array of speakers all over the place and subwoofers and all of this to give you an immersive thing, Dolby Atmos, properly mixed and mastered, will sound amazing on that, but it will also sound amazing if you play it out of a single speaker. So it will fold down and give you a great sound, so long as the single speaker, whatever device you're running it through, has Dolby Atmos built into it so that it can decode the Dolby Atmos and know what to do with it. So it means that it's kind of future-proofed. It means that it gives people a good experience. And as you say, really, Apple are pushing it because it's a core part of what Apple is doing, both with AirPods and other sort of personal audio devices, but also we're just seeing the new Apple Vision Pro, VR, XR, whatever you want to call it, the goggles that make you feel like you're in a space. If you want to be able to move through a virtual space, you need audio that works in that virtual space so that sound can come from here and move around. So it's a big part of Apple's core product strategy. And yeah, they've been really pushing labels and music creators to deliver content in Atmos so that it's spatial available. And one of the things that it took me a little while to get my head around it, really, and this is something that there's a guy called Cameron Craig over here, a music producer. He is one of the people who runs the Music Producers Guild. And I was talking to him about this, and I kept on saying, are we calling it Atmos or spatial or something else? And we both decided that actually the best term for this in general is immersive audio. Because immersive audio, there are other standards alongside Dolby Atmos that other people are using. Dolby Atmos is one immersive standard, and then Apple Spatial Audio is an augmentation of that. So Apple were offering support to music creators to help drive adoption of Dolby Atmos and Apple Spatial. And as you said, a few months back, it was something that kind of came out in the middle of all the controversy about Spotify's changing of the way revenue works, which we'll come to later on. This is the 1,000 track thing that you referenced in the introduction. So while that conversation was going on, and a lot of people in the industry were going, this is great, or this is terrible, or what does this even mean? Apple or someone, there was a leak that this 10% bonus for spatial audio content was going to start being paid. And it just so happened that came out right as everyone was kicking Spotify. And some people I've suggested to, well-placed people across the industry have said it just seemed a real coincidence that while the whole industry was piling onto Spotify, giving them a kicking, this leak came out, which was Apple is going to start paying people a bonus. Now, the problem is when you actually get down to the granular detail of how this bonus works, maybe not such a bonus for everybody. And this is to do with a lot of complicated things. So, number one, the contract, the licensing agreement that DSPs, those streaming platforms like Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, whoever, sign are confidential. So if you are a distributor, you will sign a confidential agreement with a DSP that is that's got the parameters of your contract, how you're going to be paid, how much money is going to be paid, etc., etc. Generally speaking, I don't know this for a fact because I've not seen the major label ones, right? Very few people have. Only a very limited number of people within major labels know what the major label agreements are.
Wow.
But with Spotify, it's fairly widely accepted and acknowledged that the major labels have a different deal to the deal that an independent distributor might have. With Apple, there is a perception that everybody's agreements are the same. It's a pretty equal playing field because it's about how your content is performing. I'm now getting suggestions that might not be the case, particularly as this new agreement around the spatial audio uplift or bonus has come in. Now, I don't know because, I've not seen the major label ones. However, whether the major labels have a different one or whether they're subject to the same one as everyone else, the key issue with this bonus is that it applies at effectively a whole catalog level. And so what I mean by that is a label is probably not going to have their own direct agreement with Apple. So they won't have signed a contract with Apple. Their distributor will have signed a contract with Apple. And then the whole catalog level that this is determined on is the distributor's catalog rather than the label's catalog. And so what it means is there are two important things. Number one, for a signatory to the license agreement, so someone with an agreement with Apple, to be eligible for this spatial available uplift, they have to hit a trigger threshold. So in 1 month, they have to have had 50% of their total streams come from what Apple is calling spatial available content. So it doesn't matter whether somebody actually listens to the spatial audio version, but
I see.
the catalog has to have delivered 50% of its total streams. So let's say you are a distributor and you are doing across all your clients, you're doing 100 million streams a month. Let's pick an easy number.
Sure.
50 million of those streams would need to come from Dolby Atmos spatial available content.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that 50% of the tracks that you have as a distributor need to be in Atmos, because it may well be that, it's really easy to imagine 5 tracks each getting 10 million streams. That's going to bring you to that 50 million threshold.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
But the problem is, when I've been and talked to some distributors, so again, all distributors vary. There are some tiny little distributors where they have really close relationships with their customers. So they're able to say, hey, guys, you need to give us Dolby Atmos mastered stuff so that we can hit that 50% threshold. Because before we hit that, nobody is getting that bonus.
Right.
Obviously, the major labels are better placed to be delivering their content as Dolby Atmos files for that spatial available thing. And the major labels, because they have end-to-end control, they know what tracks are in their catalog, they know what tracks are delivering significant number of streams, they know what the 50% threshold is going to look like, so they are well prepped. They've probably already hit that 50% threshold
right
that triggers the bonus. For independent creators, it's a much bigger problem, because if I'm making music and I'm using the same distributor that you're using, I don't know whether you've delivered your content as Dolby Atmos. You don't know whether I've delivered my content as Dolby Atmos. We don't know how much other content there is. We don't know what content is delivering what streams. And so it's yet another case, and this is something that really annoys me, that there is very little consultation with music creators directly, okay? When these changes are being made, someone said to me earlier on, if Universal sneezes, everybody catches a cold. And it's this thing where the major labels are really working quite closely with the streaming platforms to ensure that they are getting the best possible terms. And this Apple thing, which was quite different to the Spotify one, where, with Spotify, this idea that you have to hit 1,000 streams, and lots of artists are going to, lots of independent creator artists are going to end up making no money from Spotify, likely. That was seen as a real kick in the teeth to independent creators, and it had repercussions for Spotify's reputation. I saw a lot of independent music creators saying, well, I'm just going to pull my entire catalog from Spotify because this is not fair. With this thing with Apple, it's actually a little bit more, it's kind of a little bit sneaky, because it benefits the major labels, and everybody looks at it and go, oh, Apple is paying a bonus. But the actual consequences for indie music creators are going to be quite different. And then the other thing that is troublesome is I talk to a lot of people all across the independent music creation and business sector. And when I'm talking to distributors and people who have agreements with Apple, it was very much presented as, here is the new agreement, sign it or don't sign it. But if you don't sign it, you won't be able to deliver content into Apple anymore. And so it wasn't a negotiation. There wasn't any, can we tweak this? Can we change this? Can we look at this? It was, sign the agreement or don't sign the agreement.
Yeah,
and if you don't sign the agreement, you can't deliver the content.
Right. And so there's two questions I have for you. First of all, talking about distributors and the distributors that would be relevant to our to some of our people like Symphonic or CD Baby, is there any hope that they could somehow get involved and say yes, 50%? I mean, that would be, I think, near impossible for a company as big as CD Baby to reach that threshold, so that any of us who do upload spatial audio would get a boost.
So look, I wouldn't want to comment specifically on individual distributors, because I know the team at CD Baby and I know the team at Symphonic, and they are great companies. They are great companies who have independent creators at the core of their business, and they fight very hard for indie music creators. But I don't know the scope of their catalog. I don't know how much of their catalog has already been delivered as Dolby Atmos. But for sure, what I can say is that they have been encouraging people to deliver content in Dolby Atmos. And that's a good thing, because people should be. It's a great format. As I said earlier on, people should be working towards Dolby Atmos. But at the same time, as I said earlier, right now, the people who are best positioned to be able to deliver content as Dolby Atmos is the major labels, because there are costs. As you said earlier on, if you want to create Dolby Atmos mix and mastering in Pro Tools, there's a complexity to that. And apart from anything else, here is another actually interesting thing to do with this. Up until now, there have been some really great automated mastering services out there, AI mastering services out there, Lambda, Cloudbound, things like that, where you can take your mix and you can master it and spit it out, and it's great. My understanding is, backed by some conversations I've had with people, number one, there are not really any AI platforms out there or automated mastering platforms that are able to do a good Dolby Atmos master. Number two, the understanding I have is that Apple is actually working quite hard to ensure that if mixes that have maybe been made using automation come in, they would rather it's a genuine human created, you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying,
And this is a problem as well, because I know of really quite prominent artists, particularly in electronic music, for example, where you have a music creator who is the songwriter, the instrumentalist, the producer, the mix engineer, and the mastering engineer. They're doing everything themselves. If you're someone like that, what are you going to do? Because you can't now necessarily do that final thing to turn it into Dolby Atmos. So you're maybe going to have to pay someone to do it. And that's a barrier to entry. It makes it less of a level playing field.
I was curious about, because Apple did, one good thing they did was they did introduce a more accessible tool in Logic for creating Dolby Atmos. I haven't used it, but it intrigued me about potentially exporting a group of stems from Pro Tools and then trying to do a quick mix, quick Dolby Atmos mix in Logic with potentially using AirPod Pros or Pod Maxes to do this spatial audio mix. I don't even know if that's possible, but that might be. But
with that sort of thing, that's kind of going a little bit beyond because that's,
Sure.
audio engineering stuff. And the one thing is, and I think this is a really important thing, Apple is overall a good company. And this current thing, I think, is maybe a slightly poorly implemented thing. But the problem is it's been driven, I feel, by major labels who are able to do this, and it disadvantages independent creators.
Well, that's a really nice way of putting it. I think, because the other thing I want you to comment on, and then we have to move on, is where the money is coming from, because this 10% boost is nice, and a lot of us would think that this 10% boost is coming from that $1 trillion in cash sitting in the bank, but it actually, from what we're hearing, it might actually be coming from the rest of us who don't have spatial mixes. Is that true?
It's not that it might be coming from the people who don't have spatial mixers. It is absolutely coming from the people who don't have spatial mixers. Apple is not putting more money into the pot. Apple is not taking any of that $1 trillion in cash that they have sitting. Apple is not compensating people more. They are taking the revenue that is assigned coming through Apple Music, and they're saying, okay, we're going to split the pot in two. These people are going to get more, and we're going to take that more out of the other pot.
I think that's the worst part for me.
It is the worst part, yeah.
Yeah.
What it means is that the major labels are almost certainly getting that bonus right now, and that is being paid for by independent music creators who are doing it themselves. Now, that's no reflection on artists signing to a major label, right? There are many reasons you might want to sign to a major label, but I think it's deeply unfair that people who are doing it themselves are adding effectively to the revenue of, Warner Music declared their earnings for the last quarter today, 1.7 billion or something like that, and growing fast. And I'm not saying that Warner is taking from other people's pockets. It's just the nature of that major label thing, that their share price and their revenues, and that's all increasing at the expense of independent creators.
Going back to the very first thing you mentioned about how Apple was potentially going to use this as a little PR opportunity to maybe squash Spotify. There was a video that came out a couple weeks ago by one of the members of the band Wolfpack. I don't know if you saw it, but it was this clip of he was basically giving this little lecture about how Apple Music has an opportunity to completely destroy Spotify, to completely revolutionize the music industry by essentially operating Apple Music as a loss leader to sell AirPods, to sell HomePods, to sell laptops. I mean, to service the artists that they use in their advertising campaigns, the people who are mixing records in Logic in a coffee shop in their commercials, or the people who are sketching on an iPad Pro. These artists that have essentially made their products cool. Everybody knows that. And this was a great opportunity, not just Dolby Atmos, but they have a great opportunity. And I mean, listen, Apple Music is falling behind Spotify. It's not even anywhere close to what Spotify numbers are doing. They have a great opportunity. They're definitely enemies. Everybody knows that. A great opportunity to just say, hey, listen, we're going to give the artists double, triple, 10x what Spotify is. And we're just going to bless the artists across the board, knowing that it sells more MacBooks. And to me, I think this was just an absolute asinine decision in the wrong direction. And I just think they had a great opportunity to do something massive here and to bring some music fans over to Apple Music from Spotify. That's my opinion.
I love Apple products, right? I'm speaking to you right now on a MacBook Air, and I've got an iPhone, I've got AirPods, I've got an Apple TV, and I have been using Apple technology since my second own computer that I paid for. And I feel that Apple is a great company. This actually made me really sad because it was like Apple, I now feel quite angry about Apple. And I love Apple. And so if I'm alienated, there are going to be a whole load of people out there who are feeling the same. You're absolutely right. Apple's core community is creators. They've put that at the heart of their company for so long. And music is core as well. And there are two very interesting things you said just then. That Apple could run Apple Music at a loss. They don't need to make any money for Apple Music. Apple is not a music company. It's not a streaming company. It's a hardware company. I'm pretty sure Apple Music is running as a loss already, right?
Right.
Because
probably.
Apple will not be. There's revenue going through Apple Music, and a lot of that is going back out to the music industry, and that's a great thing, right? But all of the stuff that requires running a great music streaming service, I imagine if you then bundled that in and said, is Apple's cut of what is coming through in Apple Music revenue? Now, I don't know this for a fact, right? I'm speculating, but Spotify have to run their business on the little bit that they get to keep. Apple don't. Apple have to run their business on selling hundreds of millions of iPhones and everything else. And so that means that Apple, the way they need to think about Apple Music can be very different. They have a luxury there. Could they just decide to start paying everybody double? I don't think they could. And that's because, as you can see right now, particularly over here in the EU, there is a war going on between Apple, Spotify, and the European lawmakers, where they are saying, okay, Apple, you have to do this because you're now actually having an unfair competitive advantage that is restricting other people. So I think technically Apple could pay, technically Apple could say, we're just going to top up, we're going to use some of that $1 trillion of cash, we're going to make sure everyone gets paid really, really well through Apple Music. But as soon as they did that, the regulators in the US would crack down on them. The regulators in the EU and other countries would crack down on them and say, this is anti-competitive, because actually that would put Spotify out of business. And whilst there is sort of a noble sentiment of let's get Apple to pay more, let's get them to put in cash to do it, if Spotify went out of business because of that, that would actually have huge harm for music creation overall. And ultimately, I think that's also why Apple would not actually be able to take money from that $1 trillion cash bar to top up for Dolby Atmos, because that would probably be on the edge of anti-competitive behavior.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That was just a little fantasy of mine, but I that is very interesting. Okay, let's move on from one devil we know to another devil we know, and let's talk about Spotify, because as we started off by in this conversation back in the fall, around the time of the Spotify Wrapped, there was this information coming out that Spotify was going to not pay for the first 1,000 streams from anybody. That was, that was probably the final, like you mentioned, it was a final blow for a lot of indie artists. I kind of hesitated because their positioning was about this problem of false streams. And I think we're now reported up to 105,000 songs are uploaded every day to Spotify. From the distribution side of things, it's been easier to upload music because of the subscription model of DistroKid, where you could just upload as many songs as you want, as opposed to the pay-per-use model of CD Baby from so many years. So we do have infinite amount of songs. I guess Spotify is claiming that a lot of these tracks are either never listened to, or they're bots, they're white noise. There may be a white noise album that's divided into 130-second tracks. So they're trying to figure out a way. This is their argument, is they're trying to figure out a way to get rid of all of these garbage streams, these garbage tracks, as a way to increase the pool that we were talking about with Apple, for legitimate artists. Potentially some of our friends in the indie music scene with obscure music who have less than 1,000 tracks, they're just accidentally, they're the collateral damage in this rule. So where are we at with that? Because that was supposed to be enacted in early 2024. I'm just curious, what's happening with that? What is the truth to that? Is it a good thing in any way?
There's a lot in what you've just said, and so I'm going to go through it and unpack it one by one, because
Please.
There is a lot, and also there is a lot of there's a lot of uncertainty around all of this, and a lot of people understand some of it but not other bits, and you know, it's good for everyone to have a full understanding. So the key thing here is this idea of the 1,000 track threshold, right? That's it. That's there. It's in the new Spotify agreements that have been signed with distributors. The really important thing to understand, though, because at first I was like you, I was like, well, maybe is it such a terrible thing? Is it such a terrible thing? And then I discovered that it's not just 1,000 streams. It's 1,000 streams from 500 unique users. So if you get 1,000 streams from 10 people, you're still not eligible. Those 1,000 streams need to come from 500 individual users of Spotify. Now,
we're going to call this segment, this series is going to be called Bad News with Sam. Are you cool with Bad News with Sam? All of
I like bad news, okay? Not that I like bad news, but when there is bad news, I like going through it and showing why it's not just bad news, it's terrible news. Because this is the problem with this, okay? The news is not just bad, it's terrible. Because it's very, very achievable for someone starting out making music, creating tracks, distributing them, getting them into Spotify. It is very achievable to hit 1,000 streams from genuine listeners and begin to build a fan base. To drive 500 people to listen to your music is a much higher bar, you know? And that, again, is something where there's a big disadvantage, a big tilting of the playing field in favor of major label artists. Because a major label artist, you know, a single playlist placement on one of those big Spotify playlists, you go on Morning Coffee or something like that, boom, there's 30,000 streams, and those 30,000 streams are from more than the 500 people. And, you know, there is speculation, again, not confirmed fact, but that the major labels may have a certain amount of guaranteed big Spotify-controlled playlist placement. Okay, so that's another advantage that they have, because if they have a new artist, that artist is instantly hitting that 1,000 streams. Let me say that again. That artist is instantly hitting those 1,000 streams and that 500 user threshold from just one playlist placement.
Yeah, it's a non-issue.
Indie artists have to go out and find that audience. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is the idea that this somehow combats stream manipulation and false streams, things like that. Because the people best placed to stop stream manipulation and false streams are the streaming platforms themselves, right? Because they have all the data. They can tell from data. So why aren't they just doing that? This isn't, I don't think, about combating stream manipulation or false streams. In fact, they have also included something in this whole revisiting of the Spotify agreement that does tackle that. And that's that they are going to start fining independent distributors if a track has stream manipulation against it. So it means that that responsibility is being passed off to the independent distributors that a lot of your community and the wider independent creator community use. Now, I've talked to a lot of those distributors, and a lot of those distributors have said to me, there's a real problem here because Spotify won't tell us the rules. Spotify won't say to us what they are going to count as stream fraud, stream manipulation, fake streaming activity. So they will fine us, they'll say that it's happened, but we won't know what the parameters are. We don't know if there's an appeals process. We don't know how it's going to work. And also, the thing is, the distributors do not have control over whether someone decides stupidly to use one of those bot farms to drive more streams for their track. And there's a whole industry around this. There's a whole industry of bot farms. But then also, if you need to get 1,000 streams from 500 individual users, I've seen some of those stream bot farms already beginning to adjust their marketing, saying we can guarantee that you're going to get 1,000 streams. So this doesn't solve that problem at all. It's whoever thought in Spotify this was a good idea, maybe they did lose their job when Daniel Ek fired all those people just before Christmas. But what it comes down to is Spotify has changed the rules. It was bad news. It is actually terrible news. And I don't think it really does much to tackle the underlying problem that they're claiming it is about, which is stream manipulation, things like that. The white noise issue, that is actually addressed because functional audio will pay at a much lower rate than music. Okay. And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing, unless you're a person who's making functional audio. And there are people who have businesses where they are making functional audio. And for example, I have really bad tinnitus, and I also have a thing called hyperacusis, where certain frequencies make my tinnitus even worse and really make me feel very anxious. Okay. And so I do quite often listen to pink noise and brown noise to help calm my ears, basically. Yeah. And that is of value to me, right? Sure. And if I'm paying Spotify a subscription and people are creating that, then there is value there for me. And the problem here for me is Spotify now putting a huge emphasis on podcasts and audiobooks and things like that, because they're saying Spotify is an audio platform. It's not just a music platform. And I find the functional audio thing much harder because they are still paying for it, but they've changed the rules and they've decided that the rules are changing. So that is an aspect of it as well. But
Sam, I just want to interrupt, and I apologize, but the thing we want to know, and I don't know if you have the answer to, is if you do meet this threshold of 500 unique listeners and 1,000 streams, do you get paid for those 1,000? Would you start getting paid on 1,001 stream and beyond, or do you instantly get back paid the previous 999?
My understanding, and when we do this next time, ask me the question again, because I will go and find out for sure. Okay. But my understanding is that those first 1,000 streams, you get nothing.
I knew that was coming from you. I could tell the look on your face. You had more bad news. Well, and see, that is a huge issue, right? Because we're talking about a 10-song album. That means your first 10,000 streams are for free for Spotify.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
And also, it is a big deal because I know of artists who they're creating music, and it's not, at an early stage, it's not necessarily about the amount of money you're making, okay? But I know a lot of artists where the first dollar they make from their music, that's a real milestone. Yeah. And by putting this threshold in place, it makes it much harder. And, you could release as an indie artist, you could release 10 tracks, 20 tracks over time and get, a few thousand streams from each of those. You could be getting 10,000 streams from each of them, but unless they're coming from 500 people, you're still getting nothing for them.
Do you think that so let's look at the middle of the road artists, just the blue collar artists who do get 10,000 streams per song on average when they release a new album over the course of a couple of weeks. Do you think those people will look at their payout from their distributor and see a little 10% boost because those streams are supposed to be worth more money?
I don't think they'll see a boost. No, I don't think there's going to be a boost that they're going to see there. No, and again, I think the thing there is, if you're getting 10,000 streams in the first couple of weeks of your release for a new track, are those 10,000 streams coming from 500 people? That would be each of those 500 people streaming it 20 times each. Now, if they love you, they're going to do that. If I discover a new track, particularly from artists I already know, and it hits me, then I'm going to listen to it on heavy rotation. So within the first couple of weeks, I probably am going to stream it 20 times.
Sure.
But it requires 500 people to do that.
That's right.
To hit that.
So are these rules in effect right now as we speak in the second month of 2024?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That came in an agreement that I think started from November, I believe.
Well, and we know that independent artists and even independent distributors and aggregators are pretty powerless in this game, as we've been talking about today. But did we see some sort of like update to our terms of, our agreements with our aggregators like CD Baby and Symphonic? Did we get an email over the holidays and say, by the way, this is happening, or do they not need to send us that?
I would imagine that you probably have had an email, or there would have been something on the dashboard reflecting the new terms and conditions.
Yeah.
The problem is distributors, aggregators, they aren't just dealing with Spotify and Apple. Most decent independent distributors, aggregators, whatever term you want to use, they have relationships with dozens, if not hundreds, of streaming platforms and stores around the world. I think I was looking at this recently, and one of the big distributors, if you go to the page that says which stores and streaming platforms they work with, there were 230 listed.
Wow.
So if every single time one of those platforms updated their terms and conditions, the distributor sent you an email, you might be getting an email about this every day if there was a notification on the dashboard every time. So generally speaking, what distributors do would be my understanding, and I would have to go and check this to be absolutely sure. But when you sign up to a distributor, there is probably something, when you accept the terms and conditions and start sending music through them, that you accept that they may have to alter their terms and conditions to be in compliance with the onward licensing partners. And there's nothing they can do about that.
I don't. I'm not blaming them in any way. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our final topic, and that is three-tone music. And just a full disclosure for our audience, because I know a lot of people are interested in this story, and we've been following it since the very beginning. And three-tone is one of these distributors, one of these aggregators, helping independent artists and independent record labels get their music up to Spotify and Apple Music. And so just a full disclosure, I was approached by them. I was with CD Baby in 2020, and I was approached by one of their new employees to test out this platform and to bring some of my new music over to three-tone, which I did. And then I was enjoying the platform from 2020 to 2022. I think everything was fine, and I was uploading my newest releases. I hadn't brought over my back catalog, but I was uploading some of my newest releases. And I had told them about other record labels, and asked them if they would be willing to give an ear to the indie record label community to potentially create a distribution platform that was somewhat bespoke or at least friendly to indie labels. And so that's where our relationship with Three Tone kind of started, and things were going well until they weren't. And then people weren't getting paid and their dashboard wasn't working properly. And that's just snowballed into what a lot of us are aware of what's happening. And so that's, I just wanted to kind of put that out in the open. But the story really is we have one of these aggregators and something has gone wrong. Nobody seems to get any information except for you, Sam. And we really, really thank you for the work that you've done as a journalist, asking the tough questions, because not only are artists powerless in situations like this, but we're also just not comfortable with conflict. You seem to be more comfortable with it. And we're not really even able to ask the questions. And some of us are kind of scared to ask the questions, because how is that going to affect whether this company pitches our next single to Spotify to appear on one of those playlists where we could potentially get paid for? So there's these things where we're just, as artists, we don't really want to get involved. We shouldn't have to get involved. So we're grateful for CMU, and the BBC did a piece recently. CMU have done, I think, 3 or 4 pieces now, and a new one that came out today. So it is just a real gong show over there. Give us a little bit of update where we're at today. The big thing I want to talk about, though, Sam, to kind of direct you, is instead of just kind of living in the shit that this is kind of looking forward as to what could we have done differently back then. And you must just be shocked at the lack of accountability for these platforms.
Yeah, I am. I think it's a disgrace that something like Three Tone can happen. And I think it's a massive failing of the music industry that a company like Three Tone can screw over and rip off so many artists for so long.
Yeah.
And it took me to really dig into things and piece it together. I spent over 60 hours on the phone to people, piecing together this story to get it to the point that I was confident that I could publish it. And the fact that this has happened, I'm now looking into another distributor in the US where a similar thing might be going on. And I can't say who that is, obviously, because if I'm wrong, that would be a real problem for them. But the thing with Three Tone was, I was working on that investigation for a month because I wanted to be absolutely certain that if I published something, I was right. Because if I'd published and been wrong, that would have harmed Three Tone, and it would have harmed all the artists who were sending music through Three Tone. But honestly, it keeps on happening. This is not the first dodgy distributor that has come along that has ripped off artists. And I'm beginning to ask really serious questions at a very high level in the industry about why the industry allows this to keep on happening. And there are some great distributors out there, okay? You've already mentioned 2 of them. Symphonic, very good company, very artist-focused, very trustworthy. CD Baby, the same. Great company. Trust them. People sometimes have customer support companies with customer support issues with big distributors, but ultimately the company that is there in the background can be trusted, okay? There are other great distributors, Emu Bands here in the UK. I know the guys who run that company. They are so reliable. There are great distributors out there, but then there are these crop of real crap ones like Three Tone, where they just lie continually. And the thing that you mentioned, I think this is a really important thing. I am prepared to have those, it is quite a conflict thing when you're saying to the guy who's running a company, you're lying to me. Stop lying. Tell me the truth. Otherwise, I will publish something that will ruin your business. That requires a certain level of either idiocy or confidence in what you're doing. And I'm prepared to do that. But what I found out was, and this is something you referenced, when artists questioned him, he would really do a performance. He'd say, oh, well, I'm going to get you some money now. I'm going to get you a little bit of the money now. But what you need to understand is, just don't rock the boat, because if you do, the consequences could be really bad for the company. And then all the other artists would suffer as well. And then that would be your fault.
Mm.
And that's nasty. That's psychological manipulation. That is really doing a job on someone to stop them speaking out about something that they know is wrong. And with Three-Tone, the reason I have gone so hard on Three-Tone is it all comes down to this guy, Dean Roberts, who's lied about everything. A big part of the pitch he was making to artists and to people like you with communities that he could align with was that he'd been really heavily involved in Amy Winehouse's career. He'd discovered John Newman and been really significant in his career. I was able to confirm that he'd had next to no involvement in Amy Winehouse's career at all, certainly not on the creative side. And John Newman, great artist, when he saw the piece that I published, he tweeted saying, Dean Roberts didn't discover me. He was a tour manager who ended up stealing from me. And this whole fantasy that the guy had created around Three-Tone, I don't know whether it's that something went wrong and he thought he could get out of that hole, or whether he set out to screw people over. But the consequences have been terrible. He didn't pay his staff. There are people who've had to take legal action to get the wages that they were owed. And I had an artist on the phone to me at the weekend in floods of tears because her music had vanished when Three-Tone's ultimate distributor finally pulled the plug on them. Her music vanished from Spotify, as it has for lots of other artists.
Yep.
And she was in floods of tears saying, I don't know what to do. And I told her what to do. I'm actually going to publish a piece of content saying what people should try and do if they didn't manage to move their music from Three-Tone. Because again, the thing that bothers me is I've talked to a lot of people in the industry and they've all said, oh yeah, we want to help. And I'm saying, okay, well, what do people need to do? What are you doing to help? And they're not able to tell me the exact things. And so I'm just going to do that myself because I'm sick of sitting around waiting for someone else to do something on this.
What was interesting to me was that when you published the piece, I believe it was, remind me, October, November, the first piece?
End of October, beginning of November was when I first put.
So when you published the first piece, there really was, and then even maybe the second piece, but there was really nothing that happened from that, or that could happen from the back end, other than just the reputation side of things. But it doesn't seem like there is a police department for the music industry. Is that true?
There's not. I mean, maybe we should set that up because honestly, it's a disgrace. As I said earlier, the fact that this is able to happen, it shouldn't be able to happen. A distributor should not be able to divert artist money to somewhere else. We don't know where the money has gone, right? It's just gone. And there are still artists owed huge amounts of money. On the sort of back end of things, you're right, nothing happens fast. But actually, that's to do with lots of things. Because, again, I had a conversation with someone super, super senior in the music business the other day. And I was basically not having a go at them, but I was gently saying, maybe you could have done more faster on this. And they said to me, well, when you first talked to me, you were the only person saying this. And actually, if we were to pull the plug on someone based on one person, even though the person I was talking to knows me, knows what CMU is, that would be as much of a problem. And I agree with that.
Sure.
And the one thing is that for a distributor to be able to operate, they need to sign a lot of contracts with other parties. And at one level, it is a good thing that those other parties just don't pull the plug on something. As soon as I published my piece, the wheels began turning, and it took a bit of time for that to come into effect. And actually, there were some things that happened in the background that meant some things didn't happen as quickly as they could have happened, and that was deliberately done to give people a chance to recover their music from three-tone and get it out and get it to another distributor.
Well, that's so interesting because, I mean, this is this is a big issue, and I am somewhat organized. I have a lot of things to keep track of, but there were WAV files that I couldn't recover. The mastered files from some items. I imagine the girl you were speaking with, I imagine there's some of her metadata that she doesn't know where it is. And I can only imagine how brutal that is. Because a lot of us upload music to these DSPs and kind of think, okay, there it is, enshrined in history. The internet is forever. If I had a nude up there, it wouldn't disappear this easy. So it's I think that was really disappointing. The other thing interesting, now that I think about it, is one of the surprising things, because I had read your article, and of course I had been hearing from people in our community, and then seeing some of the dialogue online, my own experiences. I knew something was coming. I was taking screenshots of my metadata, knowing I would need those barcodes and everything. I realized whenever it hit the fan and I wanted to take down some of my music and port it back over to another distributor, I noticed that there wasn't a cancel button within the three-tone platform. There was, you could delete an item, but it wouldn't necessarily issue a takedown to all the DSPs. Whereas, and CD Baby's getting a lot of free airtime here, but I know on CD Baby, you can cancel an album or a release. And I've done it before, and literally less than 48 hours, that item was removed from all DSPs, or most of them. And I don't know if a human is involved in that. I don't know if they have to review it and click OK, or if it's an automated system. But it's comforting to know that if I wanted CD Baby to stop collecting my money, I could press that cancel button, and very soon that album would be taken down and I could re-upload it somewhere. To find out that it had to be done manually through three-tone, and there weren't employees answering emails, and there maybe weren't even employees to do it in the first place, that was terrifying. Is that not only, even if I had my files, that they could still make money off of my music.
Yeah, and this is the problem, right? As a music creator, how are you meant to know whether a distributor is legit or not? Because a distributor can give the impression that they've got all these bells and whistles, and they can tell a story about how they helped Amy Winehouse's career and all the rest of it. And, if someone tells you something, most people take that at face value, because they think, well, why would somebody be lying about this? Three-tone wasn't really a distributor. Three-tone was held together by a bunch of manual processors. Proper distribution means that you put your stuff in and it's pretty much automated from there. And that's what big distributors like CD Baby and Symphonic and TuneCore and all of these proper distributors do. There are people involved for sure, but those people are involved in helping resolve customer support issues and stuff like that. They are not moving files from A to B. They're not putting stuff that's been put in a web form into an Excel spreadsheet and putting that into another folder to get music into stores. So the problem is, as a music creator, how are you meant to know? Because you don't know what's going on in the background. And I'm really pushing for all of the good distributors to rally round and say, let's just have a little bit of transparency. Let's have something where people can see on a distributor's homepage that they are legit, that they aren't just a web form and a bunch of people running around with their hair on fire trying to pretend that it's a fancy distribution platform. And whether or not I'm going to be able to make that happen, I don't know. But I think it's really important because more and more people are creating music and there are more and more distributors out there. And this is going to happen more and more unless we stop it now.
Well, why is it that digital distribution is appealing to investors and to companies? Because there seems to be, and again, I don't know the difference between a legitimate distributor, as you've mentioned, that has a direct portal to Apple Music and Spotify versus something that's white labeling a distributor. So to me, why is it so appealing for so many people to be getting in this game? I'm hearing of companies who do other things who want to get involved in this distribution game. I guess because it's a monthly, this new monthly model, everybody loves a subscription.
That is probably part of it for sure, but I think also it's that it gives you. There are some people who get into the music business because the music business they think is glamorous, right? In reality, the music business is a lot of Excel spreadsheets and a lot of copying and pasting stuff from A to B. But I think there are some companies who are maybe not in music who get into it because it adds a bit of a gloss to an otherwise, relatively boring technology business. But I think there are certainly some players in the market where they believe in kind of the democratization of content delivery. So there are people who set up distribution companies because they want to do it properly and better and cheaper and faster and things like that. And that's great. And then there are some people who maybe set up distribution companies aligned with another business because it gives them some great data and insights. Because obviously if you're getting lots of music going through your distributor, you're able to see what all of those tracks are doing. And so all of the major labels at one point or another have had their own DIY distribution platforms because it gives them insight into another part of the market. And then there is a consolidation of distribution because ultimately the way the streaming model works, the more market share you have, the better it's going to work for you. So the major labels were all about market share. The more percentage of all the streams going through Spotify you have, the more money you're getting. And so there's lots of different reasons that we are seeing this sort of influx. And again, it is something where the barrier to entry is super, super low. I could set up a distributor tomorrow. This morning, as I was doing something, I actually thought about that. I was like, you know what, maybe I should just do that. But I could throw up a website tomorrow. I could put a form on that. I could have some basic backend that I can buy off the shelf from someone else, and I could pretend to be a distributor. And I could go and sign some agreements, which seem to be pretty easy to get accepted for.
Sure.
And I could present myself as a distributor. But that doesn't make me a distributor because there's a lot more to distribution than just pretending to be a distributor, which is the problem with free tone. So I think there are probably lots and lots of companies out there who are playing at distribution, pretending to be a distributor because they want those monthly subscriptions.
So it sounds like, in conclusion, it sounds like this could happen. This might happen again with somebody else. Sorry, I'm
going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
It's not that it could or might happen. It will happen. I guarantee, unless things change. It's happening right now. There are people being screwed over by distributors right now.
So, obviously I regret, it was a regretful, but I'm without a time machine. If I did have a time machine, I'd go back to Wembley in 1987, watch Genesis perform. But if I don't have a time machine, how is an independent artist, an independent record label meant to pick a digital distributor? One of the most common questions I get, how do I pick a digital distributor? So is there any type of discernment tool that you can give us?
I guess there is one really good source for this, which is Spotify have a page, which is a list of the distributors who have a direct agreement with Spotify.
Interesting.
Now, some of those are what I call intermediary distributors. They are distributors who provide distribution backend to other distributors. Okay. But go to that list because every single one of those distributors has a direct agreement with Spotify. Now, that's not to say that distributors who don't are bad, right? But the thing is, to have a direct agreement with Spotify means one of two things. you've been around for a long time and you've continued in business and you've not done anything bad, or you have the ability and clout to have set up and to have engaged with Spotify. You know, it's not, I couldn't go knocking on Spotify's door and say, hey, I want to be a Spotify approved distributor. Can we sign a contract? That wouldn't happen. So that's one good indicator. And I mean, another one, it's a really sad thing to say, but the bigger ones who've been around for a long time, that's not by accident, right? And I could ask 100 people who have used distributors for their opinions on their distributor and other distributors that they have used. And every single one of those big distributors that, you know, we've talked about many of them just now, I guarantee you that as many people would have good things to say as they would have bad things to say. And that's not the fault of the distributors. It's because there are so many complexities to releasing music that when something goes wrong, it really, really matters.
Yeah.
And when things go right, you don't even notice.
That's true. Yeah.
The key thing is those ones that are big and have been around for a long time, even though you'll always find people saying, oh, so-and-so is a terrible distributor, there's a reason they're big and they've been around a long time, right?
Yeah.
You know, building a distribution business is not an easy thing, and having scale and longevity means something.
That's a great point. Sam, this has been fun. I won't say fun, but it's been enlightening. It's been very helpful. No, it's been a blast chatting with you. Thank you so much for your wisdom and sharing everything on all of these topics. I hope we can do this again with new topics. And thank you also for your work in asking some of these tough questions to some of these big bullies. So we really do appreciate it.
I hope we can do it with new topics that are less depressing. Right.
Yes,
next month, if we do this again, let's have really positive news. But that's going to, you know, let's see if there is positive news.
That sounds good.